Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to film a recent and currently reading video. So it's been a while since I've done one of these, and this is going to be all the books I've completed so far in April, and then what I'm currently reading, which is too many at once, let's be honest. So the first thing that I completed was a book that I read while on vacation. It's a science fiction book, Record of a Spaceborne Few by Becky Chambers. This is the third book in the Wayfarers series. And although these all takes place in the same universe, they don't follow the same characters, so it's not like one long character arc. Instead, each book stands alone with the commonality that it all takes place in the same time period in the same universe. So in this book, not a lot happens. This is not so much a plot book. I would say this is a book of ideas and a book of tended to make you think about values and social justice and things like that. So basically we're following a bunch of different characters in and amongst a colony of spaceships, like whatever the long distance time, like to go through a long period of time type spaceships, which I can't think of the word that these are called. There's a word for that. Ships that you live on for a very long period of time. The generational, that's the word. So this is about a colony of generational spaceships which humans escaped Earth from when Earth was no longer inhabitable for humans. Some portion of humanity escaped on these generational spaceships, and they wandered through space for a long time until they encountered other life forms, other species that were already living in the universe. And some of the humans never left these spaceships. Basically, the spaceships have formed a kind of community within the solar system in the orbit of a planet, and many of the humans just stayed in the spaceships and made a life in this community. Some have left. Some would like to return. They're generations later, and they would like to return and become a part of a human community again. So it's all about, you know, insiders, outsiders, how we treat each other, what's important to us specifically when we die. There's a lot in here about sort of death rituals and what's important to us when we die. And it's just a thought-provoking book. It's not an action-packed book, but it will make you think. And I just love Becky Chambers' characters. So I thought this was a really great read, especially if you like a more character-driven type story. If you're not one for sci-fi, I think Becky Chambers would be a great one to try. I then finished a romance novel called This Duchess of Mine by Eloisa James. And this book was, I think, book 3 in a series by Eloisa James all about different duchesses. And in this installment, the couple in question had been married for quite a while, over 10 years. But in the very beginning of their marriage, the Duchess walks in on her newlywed husband having sex with another woman on his office desk, and she flees to France. And he lets her go because they're young, and theirs was not a marriage based on love. It was a marriage that he felt, you know, that they both felt they had to do kind of thing. While the Duchess was already in love with him, he was more he was thinking more about his career and his place in society. So he just let her go. And so all this time has passed. He thinks that he is dying, so he calls her home in order to have an heir, and they realize that they still have feelings for each other. And so the whole book is about, you know, are they going to be able to overcome the early problems in their relationship? Is there enough love there to sustain them even though they've both hurt each other? And it is about his health issues, and the health issues, which I'm not going to go into because it'd be spoilers. It's sort of a look at medicine in this time period, which was the 1800s in England. So that was all pretty interesting. It was a good story. It wasn't the best romance I've ever read, but it kept me entertained while on vacation. I think I read it in two big sittings, you know, two big gulps. So it did its job. It entertained me. I then finished an audiobook that I had started before I went on vacation, and that's Dissolution by C.J. Sansom. This is the first book in the Matthew Chardalake historical mystery series, and it takes place during the reign of King Henry VIII. Our main character, Matthew, is a lawyer and is somehow connected to Thomas Cromwell. So he gets sent out to investigate a murder of one of Thomas Cromwell's, basically, investigators at an abbey somewhere in the hinterlands of England. And this is all during the time period where Henry VIII, basically driven by Thomas Cromwell, is shutting down all the monasteries in England and basically driving off all the monks and tearing down all the churches in the Catholic religion. So with that historical backdrop, Matthew gets called in to try to solve this murder of this investigator, this king's investigator. And it was excellent on audio. I really enjoyed it. There's wonderful historical detail within the mystery story itself. So it's not just the mystery that you're solving. I learned a ton about Reformation politics that I didn't know. There's a lot in here about day-to-day living in that time period, especially for people who weren't wealthy. You know, there's discussion of how privies were set up and how that worked in different homes and different types of homes. There's lots of information about the servant class and how that works and the different, the things that they were up against in that time period. So it was fascinating. And I absolutely, this series has been recommended widely on BookTube for good reason, and I will definitely be continuing on with book number 2 in that series. I then read another book that's on the BookTube Prize list. This time we're in the quarterfinals of the BookTube Prize. I am not a judge in this particular round, but I still want to continue to read books that are on that list. So for the quarterfinal round, one of the books that's still on the list is still advancing through the ranks, and I had not read, is The Great Alone by Kristin Hannah. And it was available to me on ebook through my library, so I figured why not? And I read it entirely on my phone in different moments that I had standing in lines and while traveling and all of that. And I had never read a Kristin Hannah book before, and this book is about a family right after Vietnam. The dad is just returned from Vietnam. He has been a POW, so he's been very obviously impacted by the horrors that he has had to endure in Vietnam. He comes back home to his wife and his young daughter. She's like 7 or 10 or something when he comes back. And he just can't settle down to normal life. And they keep moving different places in the lower 48 until finally he decides, he gets a letter that a buddy of his that had been killed in Vietnam had left him his homestead in Alaska up near Homer. And so the family just picks up in their VW bus and drives up there and decides they're going to live in Alaska in a little homestead in the wilderness. And they are supremely unprepared to live in the Alaskan wilderness. But the community of other people in the area comes together and helps them through that first winter. And as the years go by, the father continues to devolve, become more and more violent. They become more and more isolated, and it's all about the young daughter in this family. I'm blank. Lenny. Lenora is her given name, but everybody calls her Lenny or Len. And so it's about how she survives, and it's about the relationship that she has with her mother, her very close relationship. They call each other 2 peas in a pod, and they're basically enduring domestic violence and deprivation and everything together. So it's a great premise for a story. There is there's sort of a romance between Lenny and a young boy that she meets in the community in Alaska. But the problem that I have with this book is it's so dramatic. I mean, talk about plot heavy. This book, like, everything happens to these people. Like, everything bad that could possibly happen to these people, and not just them, but the secondary characters in the community happens. Like, it's just one thing after another. You get over one major traumatic event and the next thing happens. And it just got to the point where I was rolling my eyes, because in much the same way as A Little Life, and there was another book that I read recently where it's just like shit just kept piling on and piling on and piling on. And it was like, really? It was just, it got to be to the point where I was like, yeah, no, I just can't go along with this any longer. So I finished it, and it was a story that kept me interested. It kept me turning the pages, but overall, it's just an average read for me. It was just too dramatic and too melodramatic for me. And please be aware that there is a lot of violence, domestic violence in particular, in this book. So if that's something that you just don't like, I would avoid this book. And then the last thing that I finished in the month of April so far is America 1933, The Great Depression, Lorena Hickok, Eleanor Roosevelt, and the Shaping of the New Deal by Michael Golay. I picked this up because Eleanor Roosevelt is one of my heroes, and I have always been fascinated with her, and I wanted to know more about her relationship with Lorena Hickok. And I had read the back of this, and I thought it was letters between the two women throughout their relationship, specifically when Lorena Hickok was doing investigative journalism around the country during 1933 and 1934 during the Great Depression for the government. Basically, she was going around touring different regions of the country and reporting back to the man who was responsible for running the relief programs for the government. And it's not letters back. I mean, there are excerpts of letters from the two women back and forth to each other, but that is a very minor part of this whole book. This is really, it goes region by region through the regions that Lorena Hickok visited in 33 and 34 and describes how those communities were weathering or not the Great Depression. So there's a lot of detail in this book. It isn't super long. It's like 270 pages, I think. So if really detailed historical nonfiction is not your thing, you probably won't enjoy this. I found it mostly really, really interesting. I didn't know a lot of the specific details about the Great Depression, you know, what people were earning per hour. This has a lot of information about the how labor was getting organized, how unions were responding, how people were striking in different industries. So it talks about the coal industry. It talks about farming, lots about farming in here, and dairy industry, how milk farmers were striking and dumping milk rather than sell for the low prices that they were getting. And you remember I did a video before I went on vacation where I did the 112 page tag, where I read page 112 in this book, and it was all about where I live. But that was like 2 or 3 pages of the whole book. So while that was really interesting and cool, it really wasn't a large part of the whole story. And then at the very last, basically 20 pages or so, Lorena Hickok is visiting the South, like Georgia and into Alabama and into Mississippi, and her horrific. She was a racist. I mean, let's just put it right out there. She was a terrible racist. The things that she says, the shit that she believes from the people she's interviewing, white people, obviously, was horrific and terrible, and it just colored my whole view of her. And like, I had been quite sympathetic, even though she's basically a grouchy old lady. I had been quite sympathetic to her throughout this book. She suffers from, depression and anxiety, and she's a smoker, and she's a diabetic, and so she has all these issues, and Mrs. Roosevelt was constantly chiding her, trying to get her to be more healthy or whatever. But then she just devolves into this terrible racist, and it's like in her reports back to her superior, and if I had any more than 20 pages left to go, I probably would have just abandoned this book at that point. I think there's better books that I could have read about the Great Depression. So that was kind of a bummer to have that one end that way. So that's what I have read. And so now on to what I'm currently reading, which is too many things, let's be honest. I'm still reading Grant, which I mentioned in my last video. Less than 100 pages to go. Hoping to finish that one up fairly soon. I'm reading 2 books for buddy reads. One is one that I started before I went on vacation, and I've picked it back up again, and that is The Song of Trees, Stories from Nature's Great Connectors by David George Haskell. I'm buddy reading this with Doris over at Aldi Books, and this is beautiful nature writing. He takes a tree for each one of his essays and then riffs on that to talk about our connections with nature, the human connection with nature, and how the idea that human activities and human development can't be held separate from nature, that we are nature. We are part of nature. Yes, we change nature, but we're still natural ourselves. And so therefore what we do is part of nature. And that the more we separate ourselves from nature, then this bifurcation is just making things worse. And that we need to consider ourselves a part of nature in order to move ahead, move forward, and in a realistic way, in a hopeful way, in a way that is good and right for everyone, not just humans, but all of the bits and parts of nature. And he's just an amazing writer. If you like nature writing, I cannot recommend David George Haskell highly enough. He's awesome. And then I am also reading I'm doing a buddy read with Sean, the Book Maniac, and Ange from Beyond the Pages. And we are reading The Brontes Went to Woolworths by Rachel Ferguson. Now, I had vacation brain and pulled a big boo-boo and started reading a different book. Not this book, but I've since got back on track. And we're reading The Brontes Went to Woolworths. It's a funny story, which you may hear more about from Sean. And it is a sort of a book. It takes place in the early part of the 1900s. I'm not exactly sure the dates, but it's about a family of 3 sisters and a mom. The dad is gone, whether he died or disappeared. I think he died, but it's not really clear. And there is a governess living in the household as well. And they are very whimsical people. They have this very realistic, they have this very well imagined make-believe world that they've developed with these characters that they pretend, and each of them plays along, are part of their lives. And they have like just hilarious conversations about these made-up people. And you don't know as a reader how much of this story is make-believe or pretend, and how much of it is actually happening. Like, that's part of what you're trying to figure out the whole time. But it's written in a very witty style. Each of the 2 older daughters, the oldest daughters are like late teens, early 20s, I'd say, and then there's a younger daughter still in the schoolroom, like probably 8, 9, 10, that sort of age. And their conversation is just so incredibly funny and witty. It just really cracks me up a lot of the time. So I'm like halfway through this short novel and really, really enjoying it. So I will be back to talk about my final thoughts and whether or not it was all make pretend or not. And then I am still fighting my way through Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce, which I picked up for the Irish Readathon back in March and did not get very far. I am only on page 25 of this book, which is not a very long book, but it's hard going. It's just hard going. And I'm going to give it a little bit more time to see if I can get through it, because it is on my classics list of all the classics that I want to read, and I only have like 7 or 8 of them left, and this is one of them, so I'm going to try to get through it, but it is real bad so far. And then the last thing I picked up, there's 2 more things. One of them is this one, Fruit of the Drunken Tree by Ingrid Rojas Contreras. I probably just butchered that pronunciation. This is another book on the BookTube prize list. It's still in the competition in the quarterfinals. And this book, it takes place in Bogota, Colombia, and follows another family where there's a mom and 2 daughters, and they hire a young girl to come in and be like the housekeeper maid person, and this young 13-year-old housekeeper lives in like a shanty town on the outskirts of town because her home in the countryside has been like burned down by paramilitary people, and the daughters are basically forming a relationship with this young maid. And I'm only just started it this morning, so I'm only 30 pages into it, so not sure exactly where it's going yet. It's really interesting so far. The voice is very distinct, and I've never read anything written from Colombia, so or takes place in Colombia. So, and the author is Colombian herself, although she lives in the United States now. So that's cool as well. So I'm really enjoying it so far. We'll see how it goes. And then my current audiobook is Parkland by David Cullen. This is a nonfiction book where David Cullen, who is the author of Columbine, followed the kids from Parkland for the first year after that horrible school shooting in Florida, as they start the March for Our Lives movement. And these young teenagers who are, have given me such hope that, the kids are all right. And hopefully, they're not going to sit around and let the adults non-addressing of this issue stand. They're going to fight for what they know is right, and that's some changes to the gun laws in the United States. So I am about 40% of the way through that audiobook so far. It's awesome. Dave Cullen is just an amazing investigative journalist and a writer of nonfiction, and he just takes you through this and in such an interesting and informative way. I just love his writing so much, and that is something I would highly recommend on audiobook as well if you would like to learn more about the actions of the kids after that school shooting in Parkland. So that is what I read so far in April and what I'm currently reading. I hope that you have all found some good books to read. I see that this video is way too long, so I am going to get going now, and I will talk to you later.